this menace must be confronted. Now, after careful deliberation, I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets. But I'm confident we can hold the Assad regime accountable for their use of chemical weapons, deter this kind of behavior, and degrade their capacity to carry it out. I will seek authorization for the use of force from the American people's representatives in Congress. Over the last several days, we've heard from members of Congress who want their voices to be heard. I absolutely agree.
The Trumpet Daily Podcast with Stephen Flurry.
Since he became president 5 years ago, Barack Obama has pretty much loudly trumpeted the fact that he's willing to go it alone whenever necessary to push forward his radical agenda, no matter what Congress might think or say, or even the American people for that matter. But on Saturday, instead of barreling ahead with military action against Syria, as you may have noticed on the news, the president decided to toss the hot potato over to Congress and to postpone any military action against Syria. And what I'd like to do here this morning, briefly, is to just give a little bit of overview on what this action in Syria, or inaction in Syria, reveals about the prophetic flow of world events. I mean, there are so many different nations involved, so many world powers involved, not just the United States, and certainly not just Syria. As we know, this could rapidly escalate, but it reveals so much, even what's happened to this point. It reveals a lot about the Middle East and about America and about other nations as well, as we'll see here this morning. Syria's government, of course, responded on Sunday, the day after the announcement, by mocking the United States, as you would expect, pretty much just making fun of the United States of America, of all things. According to one Syrian newspaper, this is one that's run by the government of Syria, the president's change in heart was, quote, the start of the historic American retreat. That's the way Syria sees this. A historic American retreat. They said Mr. Obama had hesitated because of a sense of implicit defeat and the disappearance of his allies. So they see it as a stunning defeat on the part of America. Syria's deputy foreign minister, Faisal Maqdad, it says, told reporters in Damascus that this postponement of action revealed hesitation on the part of America and a sense of confusion in Washington. I mean, these are pretty bold statements by Syria, which, given the power and might at America's disposal, I mean, you would think they'd be a little more careful, but they know, they sense that the will to act has been broken. This is from a Wall Street Journal editorial, Leading from Behind Congress is the title. It says, this is from Sunday, it says, President Obama's Syrian melodrama went from bad to worse on Saturday with his surprise decision to seek congressional approval for what he promises will be merely a limited cruise missile bombing. And that's kind of gotten lost in all of the latest events. The fact that even when he was supposedly barreling ahead, it was going to be a very limited strike that would just last for over a period of 2 or 3 days, and that would only target a few areas in and around Damascus. I mean, all of that had been broadcast ahead of time, which is just kind of foolish to think about that particular angle of the story. In any event, even that was called off, as we saw this past weekend. It says, Mr. Obama will now have someone else to blame if Congress blocks his mission, but in the bargain he has put at risk his credibility and America's standing in the world with more than 40 months left in office. It says here, this will go down as one of the stranger gambles, if not abdications, in Commander-in-Chief history. For days, his aides had been saying the president has the constitutional power to act alone in response to Syria's use of chemical weapons, and that he planned to do so. On Friday, he rolled out Secretary of State John Kerry to issue a moral and strategic call to arms and declare that a response was urgent. He's had all the people, the spokespeople out there saying that it was coming. I mean, they were broadcasting it all in advance, as I said. And then all of that was reversed abruptly on Saturday. Now, I thought it was interesting that on the same day that the President of the United States was announcing the fact that he was putting aside the military action against Syria, you had a couple of interesting articles regarding Germany, one in particular written by Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, which we've written about quite a lot, that individual, that is, at the trumpet.com. He wrote in the New York Times an op-ed piece that appeared, I believe, on Saturday as well, and it said that basically he was encouraging Germany to take a more active stance, to take a stronger position, a more principled stance, as he said, on Syria. And the article title was "Syria Tests Germany's Culture of Reluctance." To this point, so we're told, Germany's been tended to be reluctant to take a pretty active hand internationally with its foreign policy. Of course, they've been more active than most people realize, and if you've been reading the Trumpet, you've seen that. Another article that appeared over the weekend, this is from Spiegel Online, also using the word reluctant. It says, "The reluctant giant, why Germany shuns its global role." But notice what it says within the article. It writes, "Germany's fans in the world want more involvement than that." It's picking it up in the middle of a thought here. "And they hope that we don't just export our machines, but also our knowledge about government or our experience with ecological renewal. African countries, as well as nations in South America and South Asia, are no longer waiting for benevolent aid workers, but would rather see people with ideas and investors, and are looking for momentum. They want to know how government administration works, how to organize an education system, how to plan factories, how to decentralize a country, how to write a constitution, and how a democratic police force works." It says they want to learn from us, the Germans. This is Spiegel, a German publication, writing about themselves, the German people. It says, "Because we've acquired so much authority in these fields." It says later, "There is enormous potential in this. In the course of a more active foreign policy," it writes, "Germany could promote and disseminate throughout the world the values and principles it has recognized as right. At the same time, it could also network internationally in a way that would make the future less daunting." And so it's interesting that as you see the demise of American influence on the world stage, that here comes Germany, as Mr. Armstrong had been prophesying for decades. I mean, already it's a technological marvel for those who visit the nation of Germany. But it is about to project its power and influence around the world in a very visible manner. It's already doing so, really. The Trumpet.com's been right on top of this development. And now the rest of the world's beginning to catch up with that analysis, as you can see from some of these articles. This is from a GermanForeignPolicy.com posting just a few days ago as well, August 26th. It reported that this famous German historian, Arnulf Bering, I believe his name is pronounced, he recently was attending a festival or some sort of observance, a national holiday in Germany, and made some stirring remarks in front of Germans that were received very well. They were received well by the general public. German Foreign Policy said this, their refusal, well, it talked about him saying that Germans are perhaps the most important people in Europe. And then German Foreign Policy goes on and says, their refusal to recognize this fact has also led to only the third stanza of the national anthem being sung. In other words, they haven't sung the first stanza in many, many, many years. That is not normal, it writes. Bering predicts that in the future, the first stanza, which includes Germany, Germany above everything, he says, can be expected to be sung again. This brought him great applause from the audience in Berlin. According to a report, how many in the audience had deeply identified with this historian's appeal for German national pride, liberated from the encumbrance of the Nazi past, could be seen by the thunderous applause he received. The public's behind it, in other words. And now when the right man gets in there, the right politician takes charge, we're going to see Germany rise to the forefront of international relations. in a way that really shocks this world. That's what's coming. I received an email recently on one of the previous forums that we gave on Syria, and the individual was in agreement with some of the things that we pointed out, but he just couldn't see how Germany would rise to the center stage like we've been talking about. But it is happening, and others are beginning to write about it. Now, that's what's happening in Europe. Do you think maybe they're taking note of the weakness of the United States, which is now on display openly in the Middle East? And again, it's not like, this organization here is behind some sort of military action in Syria or not. It really is a lose-lose situation. But the way that it's been handled by the White House, that's what's so revealing. It reveals American weakness. It reveals indecision. It reveals a lot of incompetence. That's what we're seeing play out. But what about in the Middle East? What about in the little nation of Israel, surrounded by all of these enemy nations? Some have said that, well, this is only going to make Israel be that much more bold and decisive, knowing that America is not going to support an attack on Iran. Others have said, well, the Arab Spring, you have Arabs killing Arabs, and this is actually strengthening Israel. Is it? Is it really strengthening Israel? It's inflaming more hatred. It's fanning the flames of hatred. That's all that this is doing. And pretty soon, the wrath of Israel's enemies is going to return back to Jerusalem and the rest of that little nation, Judah, that's called Israel today. This is from the Times of Israel, also from Sunday, September 1st. The title of the article, it's an opinion piece, Obama Unleashes Horror in Jerusalem. That's the title. I think his name was David Horowitz. In any event, he writes, the Israeli political and security leadership is privately horrified by President Barack Obama's 11th hour turnaround on striking Syria, a decision he took alone after he had sent his Secretary of State, John Kerry, to speak out passionately and urgently in favor of military action. It is now fearful, this is Jerusalem, it is now fearful that in the end, domestic politics or global diplomacy will ultimately lead the U.S. to hold its fire altogether. So they're worried in the Knesset as well. What does this mean for the region? It's worried, furthermore, at the ever deeper perception of Obama's America in the Middle East as weak, hesitant, and confused, most especially in the view of the region's most radical forces, notably including Bashar Assad, Hezbollah, and Iran. So it's not just Syria we're talking about. It's not just Assad. Who's behind Assad? He's being funded and supported by Iran and Hezbollah and the like. It says, and it is profoundly concerned that the president has set a precedent in seeking an authorization from Congress that he had no legal requirement to seek, and that Congress was not loudly demanding, that may complicate, delay, or even rule out credible action to thwart a challenge that dwarfs Assad's chemical weapons capability. It writes, Iran's drive to nuclear weapons. You think the chemical weapons that killed a few hundred people, or maybe a little over 1,000 people, are bad? Well, wait until Iran crosses the nuclear threshold. It says Israel, this is from the Times of Israel again, Israel's Channel 2 reported Sunday night that once Obama had zigzagged to his decision not to strike for now, the White House contacted Israel's leadership. Notice this. The White House this is reported in the Israeli media on Sunday. The White House contacted Israel's leadership to convey the news. The goal, successfully achieved, was to ensure that there would be no avalanche of publicly aired criticism of the president by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers. That's Washington pulling back, pulling its hand off the trigger, and then calling Israel and saying, now, we expect you not to criticize us for this decision. Now, in the case of Israel, or in the case of the political enemies here at home, you see a White House that's very decisive, that can take strong action, that can move forward boldly, It's happened over and over again over the last 4.5 years. And yet with these enemies that want to kill Americans and Israelis, gaining power, gaining momentum, what do we see when it comes to the leadership in Manasseh, which is the United States, or in Ephraim, which is Britain, and maybe not as much in Judah, but we'll look at a prophecy here in just a second to see where their weakness is being exposed as well. But you see weakness, don't you? You see weakness in Israel, the end-time nations of Israel, primarily the United States, Britain, and the little nation of Judah. The times of Israel continues, just to conclude this quote, but privately Israel's silently appalled political and security leaderships have no doubt that Obama's last-minute change of heart harms Israel's security interests far more critically than any marginal minister's inconvenient outburst possibly could. I mean, they're saying, look, it's not that we're worried about what someone says to the media. The bigger picture here is that this change in heart in Washington is really endangering the little nation of Israel. That's the bigger picture. A little later in the piece says, well, this just points out again let me just read it. It says, though dutifully silent in public, Jerusalem has quickly internalized the damage already done by the sight of an uncertain president, all too plainly wary of grappling with a regime that has gradually escalated its use of poison gas to mass murder its own people, a regime, moreover, that can do relatively little damage to the United States and whose threats Israel's leadership and most of its people were taking in their stride. Jerusalem is worried too. Well, this next quote goes on and talks about, again, if there's no action taken in Syria, what does it mean, once Iran comes forward with the nuclear bomb? Then this last statement it makes has to do, again, with America's disappearing act from the region. It says, Israel remains hopeful that, to put it bluntly, Obama's America will yet remember that it is, well, America. They hope we'll remember that we're America. The alternative, it rather seems, is something the leadership in Jerusalem finds too awful to so much as contemplate just yet. Let's look at Hosea 5 here in conclusion, and we'll wrap this up by just looking at a prophecy that many of you are very familiar with. Hosea chapter 5. Haaretz, the left-wing newspaper in Israel, it also had an analysis on Sunday saying that America now would be less likely to confront Iran because of these latest developments regarding Syria, and how that we're seen now, America is, as being weak and hesitant and vacillating back and forth. It writes, the Obama administration's conduct gives us insight into the strategic challenge posed by Iran's nuclear program. From an Israeli point of view, the conclusion is far from encouraging. The theory that the U.S. will come to Israel's aid at the last minute and attack Iran to lift the nuclear threat seems less and less likely. It's no wonder that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is becoming increasingly persuaded that no one will come to his aid if Iran suddenly announces that it is beginning to enrich uranium to 90%. Israel is rightfully concerned and worried that it may have to act alone, but because we have insight into Bible prophecy, we know that in the end Israel's not going to act alone. They're not going to act in concert with the United States, but they are going to seek help elsewhere. Hosea 5, here in verse 5, it says, the pride of Israel does testify to his face, therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity, Judah also shall fall with them. So this is referring to the United States, Britain, and the little nation of Judah, which is called Israel today. And if you want proof of who these nations are in the latter days, of course, you have to go and look into The United States and Britain in Prophecy, the book that Mr. Armstrong wrote decades ago, back in the 1930s and 40s. God says that all these nations are going to fall together. We had an article posted on the trumpet.com over the weekend about the United States and Britain. You know all about what happened in Britain with Cameron pleading. I mean, he was leading the charge to attack Syria. He was leading President Obama, many people said. They were ready to act, Britain. Well, until Parliament pulled the rug out from under him. And then Britain went away quietly. And as the article that was posted over the weekend on our website said, I mean, could it be any worse for the United States and Britain? What a humiliating week or 2 weeks this has been for America. As that one editorial pointed out, I mean, I hope you remember that, well, you're America. It wasn't that long ago when people would have said the same thing about Britain. I mean, the sun set on their empire a little bit longer ago, but still, 30, 40 years ago, people would have said the same thing about Britain. What happened? I mean, this is the British Empire. This is the empire that ruled the world. And now they're saying the same thing about America. Well, Judah's going to go right along with them, as verse 5 says. But notice down in verse 13, it says, when Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, and we've talked about how this wound is referring to the peace process, the so-called peace process, the Oslo Accords that started 20 years ago, this strategy, if you want to call it that, where Israel would give up a little bit of land for peace, and it never has worked. It's only made the region more dangerous. And for a while now, at least for a couple of years, it is true that the Arab Spring has Arabs pretty well distracted with each other, Sunni against Shia, or whatever it is. The Islamists against the dictator. But this is not going to make the violence or the hatred toward Israel subside. It's going to intensify in the months ahead. We know this. This wound, that is the peace process, is going to cause Judah to go looking for help. Verse 13 again says, when Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Syrian and sent to King Jareb, yet could he not heal you nor cure you of your wound. So Ephraim too, I mean, they're going to look to the Assyrian, which is Germany today. Ancient Assyria settled in Central Europe. And Assyria today, in prophecy, is modern-day Germany, the so-called reluctant nation that's now the powerhouse, the engine of Europe, and that's now seeking to have a more aggressive foreign policy. Germany's taking note of what's happening. Israel in the Middle East is certainly taking note. Syria and America's enemies in the Middle East are certainly taking note. And all of it, if you just zoom out a little bit and look at it in the big picture of Bible prophecy, all of it is setting the stage for these prophecies in Hosea 5 to be fulfilled.